Shall we move to education?
Yes, please.
Where we find that sex is the dominant factor in predicting attainment. It's not class, it's not race, it's sex. And boys underperform throughout the education system, and the shortfall in attainment grows as they move through it.
Yes.
Well,
same in Scotland.
Mary Curnock-Cook said, I think it was 2018, in the Telegraph, that within the next decade, if things continue as they are. Sorry, Mary Curnock-Cook was the head of UCAS, so the University of Admittance. And she said if things continue as they are within the next decade, the gap between boys and girls will be wider than the gap between public and private schools. You know, so it would be more beneficial to be female than to be rich.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I live in a tiny village in the north of Scotland, and we can see it here in the secondary school as well. A lot of boys, as soon as they're 16, they leave school immediately. And I'm actually not 100% against it, because many of them, they go into jobs. They already know what they want to do. They go into the fishing industry, oil industry, and I think for some of them, it might actually be more beneficial than going to university. And I mean, I wouldn't be happy with like my children immediately going to university, because they're just like indoctrination camps at this point.
Exactly.
Well, sorry, Philip, continue.
But I did, because I'm a hairdresser, I cut all of the boys' hair, and we do talk about stuff, and they don't feel supported or comfortable in school, I would say. I don't think that school is made for boys anymore.
It's not.
There was a sociology paper, I believe it was in the 70s, called Learning to Labour by Paul Willis. And it discussed exactly what you're talking about, a culture where young boys, they had jobs that they were expected to go into, you know, as soon as they turned 16, apprenticeships and so on. And so they felt that like school for them was almost unnecessary. It was just killing time until they could officially have a job. And the paper sort of focuses on the education system leaving groups like this behind, where they're not engaged and the education system isn't engaging them, and it's a kind of almost inevitability that they have to end up in these roles. And I do think if the education system was trying to engage them proactively the way that it has done for females, because there were plenty of women who thought that their role would have to be a single mother, or sorry, not a single mother, but a stay-at-home mother. And the education system fought long and hard to give them a new perspective on life. It should do the same for these boys that see themselves as only workmen and nothing more.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Just thinking, if more and more boys leave school and don't go on to university, they will receive far less indoctrination. And I think, and boys and men are already more conservative leaning overall. I think when you look at the political compass, men are more prone to conservative views, and women are more prone to liberal views. And if so many women, pardon, second?
I said it's a small difference, but it is there. So, you know, if only women had voted, the margins would have been just as narrow, but the UK would still be in the EU, and Hillary Clinton would be the president of the United States.
Yeah, and so if
the world
university, and if the women stay longer in school and the boys are going into trades, that means that the women will potentially get more and more liberal, and the men will potentially stay more conservative, and that might lead to a stronger and stronger mismatch between men and women. It will potentially also lead to, at one point, women obviously out-earning men, and if women keep their hypergamy up, then it will be harder and harder for women to find partners and for men to find female partners.
Can I say that I actually brought this up to a guest speaker that came into our gender studies class. She is the head of an organisation that has ears in the Scottish government, has ears in the British Parliament, even in the EU. And she gave an hour-long talk. You know, one of the things that's brilliant about taking a gender studies course is that you hear some of the things that pass for oppression. Like I am not kidding in the slightest when I say one of the things that she complained about was that women change the toilet roll more often than men do. You know, and you hear these things and you're kind of like, well, if that's how bad things are for women, women are doing okay.
Yeah.
So like she gave this big talk about, you know, how women in the workplace were going to be overlooked and impoverished and oppressed. And I said to her that I brought up to her the Mary Curnock Cook point. I brought up to her that women spend most of the domestic income.
Mm-hmm.
That women are 60 to 40 ratio of university students, and that that women in their 20s are out earning men. Basically, before they start families, they out earn men. For the domestic spending, she said, well, they're spending it on behalf of the family, so it doesn't really count. To which I would say, well, then the men are earning it on behalf of the family, so it doesn't count either.
Yeah.
The university one, she said, yes, but they're not choosing the right subjects, which means they are more concerned with women not choosing to go into STEM than they are with men not able to go to university at all.
Yeah.
And as for the women out earning men in their 20s, which is a documented fact that even The Guardian has admitted, she just flat out denied it. She said that's not true. You know,
Wow.
no debunking, no different statistics. No, that doesn't happen. You're lying.
Yeah.
This is what we deal with in gender studies. You know, where you just get told you're wrong. I don't have to answer to you because you're a misogynist. Mm-hmm. And then I was subsequently told, well, it's not the way. It's not the questions that are wrong. It's the way that you're asking the questions. That's the problem, and they're making people feel uncomfortable.
Well, it should be absolutely okay to feel people uncomfortable in an intellectual debate.
I was told I was denying their lived experience. If I have facts that the gender wage gap doesn't exist, but they have a lived experience that it does, then I'm overruling their lived experience, and I'm not being sensitive to that.
Yeah. And obviously your lived experience doesn't count because you have a penis.
Well, this is supposed to be a science. You know, like that's the crucial word, the social sciences. You know, it's not something you can walk into and just say, well, I feel that this is true, so it probably is.
But we have to say that I think it's fair to say that education all over the West, at least Western world, I don't know about other countries, education is going downhill everywhere. And because it's not based on merit anymore, everything is more about enabling everybody to join in, instead of saying, no, for certain things you need a certain understanding. If you are not up to the task, you shouldn't go to university, and you should focus on something that you're good at, like a good job or something like that. But this attitude, everybody should be allowed to go to university, really undermines university, and introducing subjects that don't seem to have any merit doesn't make it better.
You know, I look back on like say Galileo, who said that the Earth goes round the sun, and the Pope put him under house arrest for 20 years. And people look back at that as the church stifling science. What the Pope should have done is said that Galileo was denying his lived experience, that the sun goes round the Earth. And people would be sympathizing with the Pope to this day.
True.
if the Pope was a woman.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think we're kind of spiraling a bit out of the topic very narrowly. And, you know, I don't know whether it was Philip or Hats mentioned earlier that boys aren't supported in schools and in education. And, you know, I mean, it's a gross kind of disadvantage in university where, you know, men and boys are attacked, and there are all these privileges and support available for women, and, you know, quotas where, say, you know, you're in the one of the hard sciences, like astronomy or something like that, there are quotas to let women get on the machinery and the hardware so that they get more time on it. And if you're, you know, especially, you know, a straight white man, you've really got to scramble for any little bit of time you get. But, you know, even as early as primary school, plenty of studies have found that teachers routinely mark boys down on their class. And other studies have found that self-belief has a massive influence on performance. And so there was a study that was done with a load of boys and girls, and they did some basic tests in the kind of 3 R's, but they were split into 2 groups. And in one group, they kind of got no prior information. But in the second group, they were told that boys generally perform less well on these tests. And the boys in that group performed significantly less well than the boys who weren't told anything. Wow. So the fact that the boys are getting marked down is setting them up to believe that they can't do it, even though actually, you know, in tests, their marks are considerably higher than in teacher marked assignments. And, you know, you can look at GCSEs. So girls do significantly better than boys in GCSE exams, which are their secondary school exams. But in the international PISA exams, which are exams that kind of try to level out how kids are doing globally, boys significantly outperform girls. Wow. And in the UK, the gender gap only appeared when the O levels were replaced by GCSEs. At O levels, there was no gender gap. So, you know, there is a nature of testing that is disadvantaging boys, and know this, and nobody cares, you know. And if we found out that, you know, we were testing in a way and teaching in a way that disadvantaged girls, there'd be an outcry.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, to the point where you have at Oxford, you know, they've changed their history examination kind of procedure to give girls a bit more time. You know, I mean, they've given everyone more time, but it's because girls or women were struggling to finish their papers. Well,
the in America in the 90s, feminists demanded that there be a national investigation inquiry into schools and how girls were performing, because feminists were absolutely certain that the girls were being shortchanged. So the study took about a year or two to collate, and when the data finally arrived, it showed that every subject apart from science and maths, that girls were outperforming boys. And so the feminists said, what about science and maths?
Yeah, and we still see that.
Yeah.
I went to our secondary school here, and there were books that children could take home and read, and it was for younger kids, and all of the books were for girls, and all of the books were girls can do science, and girls are adventurous, and girls are amazing, and girls are superheroes. And it was, and a lot about like immigrant girls that made it, and there was one book for boys, and it was okay. It was nothing. It wasn't like girls can wear dresses, um, but it was very clear.
Called Ronald the Repentant Rapist by any chance?
But yeah, it was very clear that there was an incredibly strong focus on helping women to succeed, but absolutely nothing for boys. And so that's one thing. Another thing is there is a whole wall in the school highlighting rape and domestic abuse. And again, only female victims, and the whole focus is exclusively on boys are bad, girls are the victims. And then the third thing I wanted to say, I've got a shop, and years ago a family came in with a young kid and about art and stuff, and then I asked him how he liked school, and he was 6 years old, and he said, "Oh, I don't like school." And I asked, "Why don't you like school?" And the 6-year-old kid said, "Because they don't like boys." And
Oh,
and I didn't ask, and I didn't go into the men's rights stuff. I just asked, "Why would you say that? What gives you this impression?" And he said, when the teachers ask something and everybody raises their hands, they only pick girls. They never let boys answer it. And I just said, "Oh, that's not right. That's they really shouldn't do it." But I didn't say, "Oh yeah, that's exactly how it is." But then I took his father, and I gave him the book Boy Crisis, and I had several copies, and I said, "Take this book. What your boy is telling you is true. It's not just in his imagination. Help your son to succeed." But if a kid notices that, it's sad.
Well, I mean, Christina Hoff Sommers, when she wrote The War on Boys and Who Stole Feminism,
Yeah.
she talked about how boys, they're viewed as delinquents if they don't want to engage with Shakespeare, for example. Girls are quite happy to read Romeo and Juliet, and boys are not interested. And that's seen as because boys, they're not mature and so on and so forth. And Christina Hoff Sommers was very clear. She was like, they will engage. You just have to give them the right material.
Absolutely.
If you give them a 500-year-old text on a romance, they're not going to be interested. But if you give them, a book that's all about, the craziest stunts in the world or something like that, whatever it is that gets them reading, because that's what matters. It's expanding their vocabulary, expanding their diction. It doesn't matter what the subject matter is. And she also she referenced another study, I think it was in Who Stole Feminism, where she talked about how feminists had been aghast to hear of a statistic where teachers were interacting with boys about twice as much as they were doing it with girls. And feminists were, shocked, and they were demanding that this be looked into. And what it turned out to be was that teachers were giving boys into trouble twice as often as they were giving girls into trouble.
Yeah, interesting.
It's not only the subject matter that they're covering though, and I think from my boys' school, my boys both at primary school, and it's kind of a mixed picture. A lot of horror stories to tell you about it, but they, in terms of literature, they do have a wide selection of literature available that's targeted at boys and that the boys love, but it's also about enabling the boys to express their kind of energy before you ask them to sit down and focus. And so there's studies that have shown that if you let boys run around for 15 minutes every hour, they will sit down and engage with their work. But if you don't let them expend that energy and get rid of all their kind of boyish wildness, then they can't sit down and focus. Their mind is not able to sit down and get on. And across the Western world. We've been shortening break times, and you know, we our boys' school, the boys are not allowed to play games with guns like this. You know, they're kind of, and any kind of rough and tumble play is like pounced on straight away and not allowed. But they need that, and if they're allowed to have that, then they will be able to do what the teachers want, you know, and behave like girls in the periods when they actually need to.
Well, I completely agree, Liz. Again, in the War on Boys, Christina Hoff Sommers lamented that traditional playground games were slowly being erased, and she talked about an example where tug of war had been replaced by tug of peace, and it, like she talked about the same thing, you know, that the boys have all this energy and they need to expend it, because here's the thing, you know, our civilization up until literally about 100 years ago was dependent on that energy. It needed boys to be able to work, to be able to fight even. It needed, I mean, look at, for example, Sparta. Sparta started training boys for war at the age of 7. You know, their entire civilization was built on this boundless energy that men have. So if you want to move to a more intellectual society, which is great and it's progressive, you have to accept that it's unreasonable to have literally trained men for millennia to be energetic and then smack them in the face and say, this isn't what we want, why are you doing this? You know, you have to accept that that's who boys are, because it's who we needed them to be, and it's why we're here to begin with.
And also, you know, to be clear, it's not only boys. We're talking about possibly 30% of girls who have, you know, a more kind of masculine brain and kind of way of being, who would also benefit from having opportunities to behave in kind of rough and tumble ways.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that a lot of violence that you see committed by young men and boys comes from a place of not being able to express this energy productively and not being taught how to put this energy into good use. I mean, gang violence, all of that. These kids are looking for a father. They're looking for a place to challenge their energy. And if they would go to something like the military or something just where they can learn how to be a man and learn how to do something with their manliness, they wouldn't do the same destructive things. But unfortunately, I think it's hard for a lot of women to understand male energy, and to them it looks scary. They think you can suppress it, but what do we know about suppressing energies? It will just come back in a very warped and destructive way. Everybody knows that, but it's being ignored.
Well, I again, I completely agree, Philip, that competitiveness is being stifled for the sake of inclusivity. You know, the participation medals and so on. And you're absolutely right that young men have energy that they need to expend, and they used to, you know, to some extent they still do, but it was far more encouraged for them to do team sports, for them to, you know, to have competition. Christina Hoff Sommers talked about how healthy competition was, and how removing competition for inclusivity meant that the boys are not getting that rush of adrenaline that they're craving from you know, the thrill of the game and so on and so forth. It is very much like you know, having a dog and expecting it to be a cat. You know, if you just shout at it enough and you put it in the same positions, eventually the dog will just be a cat and there won't be any problems.